Welcome to It's Been How Long? The podcast about Cherry Hill High School East students from the late 1970s and early 80s. This is Kara Siegel. So I'd like to welcome in Lou Schopfer to the It's Been How Long podcast studio today. Hey, Lou, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kara. I'm real. It's enjoying retirement, and I guess it's been. I saw you like last week at Kaminsky, so it hasn't been that long since we've spoken.
Right, right. Thanks for agreeing to be on the podcast. And though we saw each other last week when we were shooting this podcast, chances are this podcast is going to go up in like 2 months or something. So
Okay, good to know.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, so here we are again, 43 years.
Hmm.
What are you up to? You say you're retired. That's great.
Yeah, well, I when I was a senior, I was didn't know what I was going to do. I was interested in a lot of different things, and I ended up applying to three colleges. My dad was a Temple alum, so I applied there. My brother Carl was a Rutgers alum, so I applied there, and I applied to Camden County, and I ended up going over to Temple and looking at it with my dad and saying, "Nah, I can't imagine doing this. I didn't like the city there." And then Rutgers, I didn't really like Camden, so I ended up going to Camden County. So I graduated. When our class graduated, actually, Craig Scheingold drove me to graduation. So a lot of my friends and relationships happened to evolve around emergency services because I was a first aider, then an EMT, and then a paramedic. So I
All
went.
during high school.
Well, I what happened was I started out. I took in my junior year. There was a first aid course that I took at Woodland Firehouse in Cherry Hill, and that was known as a 5 points class. And basically, it was extrication, emergency childbirth, CPR, things like that. My brother Carl was a osteopathic physician. He's still practicing down in South Jersey. He was a farm doctor, and he got involved in the ambulance squad in the early 70s. And as a result, I followed in his footsteps. So we'd watch Emergency together and the Rookies and SWAT and things like that. So I ended up going to taking that class, and then you had to be 18 to take the emergency medical technician. So my senior year, I was taking the EMT class at night at Camden County College, and then I ended up working on the volunteer ambulance squad, Cherry Hill EMS, which was on the east side of town, and then uh, eventually worked for like American Medi Wheels and Camden EMS. And then when I was going to Camden County, I went through Camden County taking law enforcement curriculum during the day, and I took the paramedic curriculum at night. So I was basically going full time for a regular college and then full time for paramedics. And then that basically provided the revenue stream that I need to go to college because I was the youngest of six living kids. My parents actually had eight kids, and they actually had four kids right after World War II in like 3.5 years. And then there was a 10-year lull, and then they had four more kids. So I have two brothers that were deceased. So I was basically the baby by default. And then I ended up going to Camden County and being able to pay for my education. I think my parents paid for maybe my first semester of books, but basically I'd work double shifts to get to the bursar's office so I could pay for college. I went to Rutgers Camden, I got an associate's degree from Camden County in what was called law enforcement and administration. From there, they said, "Oh, all your credits will be transferred," which was a total lie. Yes, they'd be transferred as free electives. So all the fun stuff that everybody takes in their junior and senior year at Rutgers, I
Good.
was still taking
Yeah.
the basic stuff. Yeah, so I had to take the math classes over again and things like that, and that was absolutely, horrendous. So I was basically doubling up on credits because I wanted to graduate in time. And then I ended up going for my master's degree in public policy at Rutgers Camden.
Hmm.
So then I started working for the state. So yeah, so that was basically my story in a nutshell.
Wow. And so what are you doing now?
Okay, so when I was going for my master's degree, we had to do an internship. So I interned it in the Department of the Public Advocate. Basically, we investigated administrative actions and inactions of other state agencies. And then they kept me on as a consultant, and I was newly engaged and I was going to get married. So I really needed a full-time job. I enjoyed working as a paramedic, but it's a difficult home life because I'm working a 4 to 12 shift. Basically was the power shift because I was the younger man. So it just really didn't have much of it wasn't conducive for a personal life. So as a result, I ended up applying, and they hired me to work in the last place I would ever thought was the attorney general at the time was putting together a a team to reorganize the division of motor vehicles. And we basically, by changing the name and bureaucrats, we make it better. So it went from division of motor vehicles to motor vehicle services. So I worked in like the revenue processing. They basically, all the way they took in their financiers and auditing and becoming more customer service friendly and things like that. So I did that for about 18 months, and I was newly married, and I wanted to have security in civil service. I was considered a project specialist, basically a political appointment. So I served at the whim of the administration. So I took well over 200 civil service tests in my career to get my permanency and things like that. So I went over to the Department of Health for a short gig just to take they took me right off a cert list, which is really important for bureaucrats. It shows that you're a regular guy, you got pulled off, you did the best on the test. And as a result, I served there for about 6 months. And then I had 3 opportunities at the Office of Management and Budget. One was in the budget office, one was in management services, and one was in their planning office at the time. And I spent about 8 years in OMB in the budget office. I loved it, but you couldn't take any time off between Thanksgiving and Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. You literally were working 6-7 days a week because it's the governor's budget. You had to defend it. You had to know all your background of the agencies and things like that. And really, you couldn't really spend time with your family on Thanksgiving. It was a great job, but it was not really a job that was conducive to family life. And we wanted to have kids and things like that. So I was worked for a terrible boss at that point at OMB who absolutely hated me. We were co-equals. He got promoted, and he said, "Lou, you don't do enough analysis." And I said, "Okay, I'll show you." I went over to New Jersey Network. The administration was changing at the time, and the executive director liked me. And she said, "I'd like to have you on staff." And I said, "Well, I'm a career civil servant. I don't want to lose that. Call the governor." So she ends up calling the governor. And then at 5 o'clock, I was over at New Jersey Network for 2 years, started as their director of the transition team. And then I became their CFO, assistant treasurer of the foundation, director of planning and analysis. Basically, what I went in is she wanted to fire people. So I was the guy who fired them, and I basically picked up their job. So that was
Was that like that movie where the guy goes and fires people?
it was kind of like, I think, like Michael J. Fox's Secret of My Success. I wasn't in the mailroom, but all of a sudden I'm sitting in with people in Fortune 50 companies asking them for millions of dollars. One of the things that we did is we structured a deal with the Food Network, because we had the New Jersey Network, which maybe about 5 people watched on Long Island. There was must carry rules. So we ended up selling our rights, and we could fund New Jersey Network. The challenge with public television is it received probably about 40% of its money from the state, about 8 from the Fed, and then you had to go out for make about 50 plus percentage in underwriting grants and things like that. So that was a pretty difficult job in a lot of ways, but I got to meet a lot of really exciting people, and it was eye-opening to what life was like. Literally, I was working 80 plus hours a week in Trenton, and I would leave, and by the time I got home, my director the executive director, faxed 3 legal pages of things I had to do, each of which probably would have taken a day for the next day. So we had to trim staff, but at the same time, the treasurer's office was considering selling the network. So I had to basically write a secret RFP and hire a company to come in and do an asset appraisal. And when we were doing asset appraisal, we found that we had equipment we didn't need. So we sold transmitters to Vietnam because they needed transmitters, and we had transmitters. They had the cash and helped keep the organization afloat. And and it was really a challenging time, because I really got to learn a lot about labor negotiation, things like that. We had to lay off people, and then my shop steward was showing me how much it was costing to bring in part-timers, and we could have brought these people back. So we were able to figure that out, bring some people back. But there was a time like they dedicated the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in the Meadowlands, and we just didn't have the money to do it. And I went to the union and I said, "Hey guys, this is something we should be doing. General Schwarzkopf is going to be there. The governor's going to be there. All these Vietnam veterans, this is their memorial." And I said to them, "I'm willing to pull cable if you guys will do it for free." So I was a production assistant on that, and I literally pulled cable as the guy went around and shot video of that event. And that was really, really cool, because it gave me I was getting coffee for the people in the production booth. But those types of things, we were able to produce a documentary on domestic violence, which was who was Diane Sawyer was the one who did the voiceover for that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really cool, because
so you were the voice of the Cougars. Was this your step into that world?
It was kind of like Forrest Gump. I kind of stepped in it and I didn't really know what I was stepping into at the time. Life is like a box of chocolates and I like to eat the chocolates. So I they would I was like a little kid. Like there was a genocide going on in Rwanda, and I needed to send a film crew there to capture what was happening to report back about the impact. We had, there were New Jerseyans
And
that were
this is
there,
from New Jersey Public
television and radio.
Television. You were
Yeah.
sending a film crew.
Shooters, basically shooters, which we called them, which was a film crew that went over there to film what was happening. A Siberian nesting cranes. I have a picture in my den of he was over in Siberia and he had the only pictures ever taken of these nesting cranes that were at the time. I'm sure things have happened since then, but we did a domestic violence documentary. It was one of the first. And it got actually a Mid-Atlantic Emmy as a result. And I'm credited as the finance guy on that Emmy, which is kind of cool. I didn't go to the Emmys, but it's neat to know that that was part of something I was involved in. And then really the big thing was I swam at the YWCA in Trenton. There was a YMCA, which kind of closed down. And then there was a YWCA and they had a pool and I love to swim and I'd swim on my lunch hour. And they would do this thing called the Week Without Violence. So they knew I was at New Jersey Network and they said, "Hey, Lou, could you help us out with this? We want to, each day was committed, violence against women, violence against minorities, things like that." So they wanted to do a roundtable on helping the community to discuss relationships that were going on within Trenton between police officers, the prosecutors, community activists, things like that. And I ended up pulling this committee together. And it was really funny because when you talk about racism, at the time, white people didn't want to talk about it. African Americans wanted to talk about it a lot. And as a result, we ended up pulling this disparate group together, which had never spoken to each other. They always kind of like spoke against each other. And that week, Rodney King was beaten by the LAPD.
Mm.
So the city was a powder keg about to explode. And by bringing all of these people together, they were able to calm the city that was about to blow up. And as a result, the YWCA nominated me and recognized me. And I ended up carrying the Olympic torch in 1996 across the Trent Makes Bridge, which totally surprised me. That was really cool.
That's amazing.
And I was probably one of the first men ever recognized. They told me at the time I was the first man in the 90-year history of the YWCA. They took me up to Trenton. I met Molly Yard, who was the president of the YWCA at the time. But for the work that I did with the YWCA, which was a direct result of my being placed at the New Jersey Network. So that was really neat. That was a really neat experience.
Very cool.
And then from there, I went over to the treasurer's office and I worked on what I like to refer to pillaging, plundering trust funds. They were basically efficiency initiatives. I wrote consolidation plans for state departments, try to streamline through technology. One of the things that the use of purchasing cards were totally unheard of at the time. And I worked with the guy who's actually working on digital signatures from the U.S. Attorney General's office. What is a signature and what constitutes a transaction? And one of the things is I had to go for a formal legal opinion in New Jersey because when the Constitution was redone in 1947, prior to that, you had to swear before God and country that the goods and services you were providing to the state of New Jersey, under oath, you were actually providing to the state of New Jersey. And that was eliminated in the Constitution. And nobody ever knew that because nobody ever did a legal review. So that allowed the state to go into the electronic age and use things such as purchasing cards and things like that to make purchasing more efficient. Then one of the challenges, and so I negotiated with, it was Nations Bank at the time, with Visa to use purchasing cards to buy things. And we basically received money because they took part of our float and they ended up giving it back to us. And then, as with all state bureaucracy things, it was a great thing that wasn't costing the state any money at all. And they were making money, and they decided to build a system that allowed the state to basically get both parts of the equation. So it was one of those things. It was a great idea that worked, and then it ended up being taken over with a lot of things with the bureaucracy. If you ever want to understand government bureaucracy, is just read the book If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, because if you give a mouse a cookie, then you need to give them milk. And the same thing happens with the bureaucracy. As a guy who always wanted to see government be efficient in what it's doing, the challenge is government does things to be inefficient, and that because an efficient government would be one that would be a totalitarian regime. So you don't want to be too efficient because you want to make sure they have a separation of functions and things like that. But at the same time, you don't want to have a situation where you're not getting much done. And I always try to like cut through the red tape, and that rattles cages. So as a result, I ended up ticking off the right people. So they exiled me for a period of time. And then I got placed on the water commission, and the state was in a water crisis. So then all of a sudden I became pivotal in that. And then I
Well,
ended up,
let me
sure.
wind back around to you. You are retired now,
Yes, I am.
and so how are you doing things outside of work endeavors?
Well, a lot of my time right now has been spent doing things that I've wanted to do. I've become more active in my church. I joined what was called Stephen Ministry, which is basically it's one-on-one care with individuals who are going through a tough time. So people are going
Mm,
through a divorce, they're dying themselves, the loss of a loved one. I spend time with them, and 1 hour a week, I just basically listen while they talk.
mm,
And then I became actually a leader of that endeavor. And then I'm involved in the prayer ministry at church. I actually go today is I go to a retirement group that we meet from 9 to 10:30 in Haddonfield. And there's a man who actually runs it. He's a retired psychologist. And we spend time just talking about what is it like growing older, losing friends. Today we discussed funerals for an hour and a half. And it's just a great group of people. And the people that attend that group, retired federal judges, prosecutors, public interest lawyers, things like that. So it's really been a kind of a fun experience going through that. I go to different type of Bible studies, and what's nice being retired, like tomorrow, the Cherry Hill Library, they run a lot of free classes, and one of the classes is on using Alexa, so Alexa enabled devices. I actually attended one on attending making podcasts.
yeah,
Using your iPhone, using your Mac computer. A lot of these things are free. So the beauty of being retired is there's a lot of free things like concerts and things like that that you can go to. So that's how I spend my time. Also, I put a schedule for myself. So for 34 years, when I was driving back and forth to Trenton, my wife did the household here. And as a result, so Monday is laundry day. So that's when I usually listen to the podcast. Tuesday's food shopping. Wednesday's internal cleaning. Thursday's external cleaning. And I help my kids at their places too. So,
that's
and there's things that
great.
always come up.
And you also told me that you have been boxing. Is that right?
Yeah, I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia back
Mm,
in 2020. I literally retired and my white blood count was high.
mm.
So sent me to cancer doctor. Fortunately, as long as you keep the red blood cell strong. So the YMCA partners with Live Strong. So for the past 12 weeks, I've been going to working with personal trainers and people who are going through cancer, various stages of recovery, and everything from boxing to bar classes to Pilates to yoga to walking to exercise machines, whatever it is, and they work with you one-on-one basically to increase your strength, your endurance, and as a result feeling better. And then also obviously the Y uses it as an opportunity to showcase their services, which I'm a member of. I've been going to the Mount Laurel Y for many years, working up in Trenton. So it's a great program, and I usually go to the gyms 3 to 4 days a week. I try to hit the gym about 12 times a month is my personal goal.
Oh, that's great. So did you do some of those activities back in high school, or what did you do?
What did I do back in high school? I was involved in the junior classical league, and it was funny because I signed up for 4 years Latin, did it like in 3 years, and I can't remember anything about Latin anymore. Like we couldn't even count. Like I was thinking IV, it's like, but the junior classical league had these events, and one of the events was they would meet with all the different schools. And my mom had a friend who was a seamstress who was retired from Broadway, and I wanted to dress up as a Roman centurion. So she actually made a costume for me, but she couldn't finish the skirt. So she said, just go to Kmart and get a skirt. Well, in the 70s, walk as a man with his sister walking in and trying on women's skirts in Kmart. We actually got kicked out of the Glassboro Kmart, but it had the skirt. And there is a picture of me in today's Sunbeam, their newspaper, of the best dressed centurion. But Mrs. Hayes would have me do these oratorio contests, and I could never pronounce things well. And we would go over it and over it. The other thing I was involved with was Broadcast Club, did Monday morning broadcasting, and that's how a lot of people remember me. Mr.
Who
Kim,
else was in that with you from our
Jeff
class?
Lyons did
Yep.
sports, and then Tony Greenberg was he was probably a senior at the time. He's probably class of '78. there was a bunch of people whose names escape me, but
Yeah.
it was Mrs. Carpenter was the one who ran it, and there was
Okay.
actually a communications class later on.
Oh.
So that's pretty much, and really the thing is, being in high school, you really didn't want to be noticed. And since I was, like I said, the second generation of my parents' kids, I would wear hand-me-downs. So my brother had like these like Nehru jackets, which were really cool, probably about 10 years sooner. But when I was wearing, they were weird. So I was always like kind of wearing my siblings' clothing, which I absolutely hated. So one of the things is you always kind of wanted to blend in to high school. You really didn't want to be noticed. But what was nice about broadcasting is you could be noticed. So, and nobody knew who you were. Kind of like the mascot. Nobody knew, they knew the voice, but they didn't really know the face or anything else. So
Well, that's cool. So, since you graduated and worked in for the state and everything, have you had a chance to do any travels in the country at all or outside?
when I was in high school, my sisters wanted to go to Germany, and my mom thought it was a great idea to have their 15-year-old brother tag along. So we actually went to Shannon, Ireland, Bavaria, got to see the Munchausen Castle, Munich, Zurich, Salzburg, and stop over in Santa Maria, Portugal. And it was one of those things. My sisters bought cuckoo clocks when they were in Germany, and I bought a gun.
Oh,
It was a kind of like like it wasn't really, it looked like a gun. So, of course, taking that through security in Munich airport, my sister had it with her and said, I have my brother's gun here. So, security pulled her aside and they gave it to the pilot. And once we landed in the US of A, they gave it back. It was, it was like a thing you hang on a wall. But it was funny back in I can't imagine in this day and age, somebody, oh, by the way,
you'd not been able to get on that plane. You'd
you'd be on
been,
a
yes,
watch list, the whole 9 yards.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Besides that, my wife and I, when we got married, we went to the St. Thomas and stayed on Water Island, which was in the bay there, in a hotel called Seacliff, which was eventually destroyed by a hurricane. Tried to
Mm,
go back there to like for 25th anniversary. There's some homes that you can rent, but the whole allure, it felt like Fantasy Island. Literally, you were
mm.
on an island in the bay at St. Thomas. You were on your own. There's about 5 other couples in this hotel. It was absolutely beautiful. And like you want to relive that, but you really can't. So it's probably a good thing the hotel was destroyed because it probably wouldn't be the same.
All right. Um, so is there a class or teacher at East that influenced you or an experience during high school that influenced you?
Well, it's funny. I kind of, as I was thinking about this, Kara, is I actually want to, if it's okay to go back further in time, I
Sure.
like back to Horseman Elementary School. One of the
Mhm.
standout memories, there was a crossing guard there, Claire Bowman, who was a crossing guard there for like 50, 60 years. She just retired a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And Judy Katz and I were safeties. And one of the things about
Sorry,
Mrs.
who
Bowman,
and you were
uh,
safeties?
Judy Katz,
Oh, okay.
Judy Katz and I were in every class together, I think, in elementary school. Well, Mrs. Bowman taught me a lot of respect for the American flag because every morning we would raise and lower the flag. We'd have to fold the flag. So a lot of what I learned about patriotism, I put back in that moment right there. That was really kind of a thing that really stood out in my elementary school. And then going on to Heritage Middle School, Larry Rubin ran what was called the Triple I Project, which was individualized initiated instruction. And I was really interested in SWAT and law enforcement at the time. And we worked on, I basically learned about special weapons and tactics and it was like high tech at the time, but it was slideshows of SWAT teams and how they operated and things like that. So that developing those research skills, researching my passion was the thing that really kind of jumped out at me. And then, of course, Mrs. Hayes with the Junior Classical League, Mrs. Carpenter with Broadcasting Club. I think of there was in Mr. Lascalzo taught a forensic science class in our senior year,
Hmm.
and we actually went to the Mount Laurel, the Mount Holly Crime Center, and there was a scientist who took us around, and this is real because I think of this today, and it actually horrifies me that he opened up a container of a specimen that they worked on. He said, and he put his finger in it. Does anybody want to taste it? And it was 100% pure cocaine. So I can honestly say that I did cocaine at school at Cherry Hill High School East, and nothing happened. In fact, one of the other kids who was there actually passed out. It was bitter. It was pure cocaine, but it's one of those things I can't imagine in this day and age
Oh
how like
God.
teachers doing that. The other thing is I really loved Daryl Bear taught electronic music. And he was also in charge of jazz band back then. I didn't play in jazz band, but I recorded the concerts for him. And I needed a ride home one night, and we packed up all the tape deck and all the microphones and things like that. So the parking lot was empty, and he did donuts with me in his car in the parking lot. And I was like, I can't imagine in this day and age, like, those people would be horrified about things like that. But those are some of the memories. It's just teachers seemed a lot cooler back then. I think there was a geometry class I took. The lady was going through like this really terrible divorce. So she always managed to work in things like Cherry Hill marriages and things like that. Well, one of the things that she did is she had all the guys go up on the board and write on the board, and all the girls judge their butts in class. And I thought to myself,
My God.
can you imagine, me too, that actually happened and nobody got offended by it? I'm curious if anybody else remembers any of those stories. And then I think of, we had an English teacher. I know Scott Wisher. There was a couple others who were in the class, Mary Leinard. This guy was petrified of bees. So if we wanted to get out of a quiz or a test, we'd say, hey, there's a bee in the classroom. And he'd be like, kind of like, waving his arms, freaking out that there was a bee. But it was funny because I don't want to mention his name, because he actually had a really nice thing in my yearbook about what a great student I was. And I didn't think I was a great student at all. The other thing that's really funny is if you look in the yearbook, you'll see NaCl4. And people who did that, it was basically salt. So they put salt 4 as a joke. So if you see that as activities that students did at Cherry Hill East, and you'll see that under several names, you'll know who was in that English class. I didn't do it because I was too scared to like go on my permanent record. But and then and Dr. Kim, well, Mr. Kim, actually, who did QPS,
Yeah.
actually did a martial arts club in my senior year. So those are the activities. And I was really active in church activities. I think that's one of the themes that has come out in your podcast, is really the connection between BBYO, school, and how that impacted how those relationships continue. So a lot of my friends actually attended Haddon Heights High School. In fact, my girlfriend was a girl who had attended Haddon Heights High School. So I didn't really have any relationships in the school. I was pretty much too scared to talk to girls. So the girl had to come up to me and have a conversation.
So that segues nicely into my next question, which is, did you have a high school sweetheart?
Yes, I did. I dated a girl from Haddon Heights High School. Her name was Patty, and we're actually still friends today. She's a retired lawyer, and she lives in Woodcrest. So,
Oh,
yeah, so it was one of those things that I met her at my church, and she was the one who kind of asked me out, and we dated. And it was actually kind of funny. I broke up with her just before graduation, and my mom didn't know, and invited her to my parents' graduation party. So that was a
oh,
little awkward. Yeah, that was very awkward. But yeah, we've still maintained friends after all these years. So
well, that's nice. So tell me about your last and final sweetheart.
yes, Jan. Well, I met Jan at a Christian singles group at our church. She was the pastor at the time, started it for Christian singles at Haddon Heights Methodist Church. It has a different name now. And there was a group of 8 of us that attended, 4 of which were over the age of 80, Jan, myself, and 2 other girls. So obviously we broke off into a younger group. Jan and I started hanging out together. She's originally from Manlius, New York. She attended Fayetteville Manlius High School in 81 is when she graduated. And it was funny because I was dating another girl post high school, and she wanted to go to a wedding in Syracuse. I said I would never go to Syracuse, and I ended up marrying somebody from Syracuse. So I've been there quite often. So we started out just as friends. We really just liked what I really liked about her, unlike other girls that I dated, is she just liked me for me. I didn't need to impress her with anything and prove something to her. We just had this friendship that has continued throughout the years. We've just been best friends ever since. And
Well, that's wonderful.
yeah, we started dating in December of 85, got engaged on the day I got my master's degree, hands across America, May 25th, 1986, and got married October 11th, 1986. And we're both October babies. So both babies in the family and things like that. So we literally celebrate, my birthday is the 5th, our anniversary is the 11th, and then her birthday is the 12th. So everything hits us all at once.
Oh, that's nice. And you mentioned you have a couple of kids.
Yeah, Elizabeth is a mental health specialist for a school district down in South Jersey. She is the valedictorian from Cherry Hill West. So she ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania, got 3 degrees there. She's currently pursuing her PhD, and she works with kids in crisis. That's kind of been her bailiwick. And she's single. She lives down in South Jersey. She owns a home in Pittman area. And then my son Matt is also single, and he works for Freedom Mortgage, and he lives in Clementon. So it's great. My kids are nearby.
Oh, that's wonderful. So do you have friends from East you're still in touch with?
A couple. Brad Soltoff is. We grew up near each other. We actually played together when we were little kids. It was really funny. We both had a love of Lost in Space.
I remember
So
that.
he still goes to those. I remember one of my vivid memories as a child is taking pie plates, putting them together, and making them look like the Jupiter 2. So as a result, we would play that way. There, I went to Doug Burns' bar mitzvah. That was the only bar mitzvah I went to as a Christian kid with a Jewish sounding last name. It was nice to be invited to one. Growing up in Cherry Hill. Judy Katz I see quite regularly, and then working in EMS. Craig Schengel was on the fire department, later with the sheriff's department. Uh, Tony Greenberg, who's a physician up in Central Jersey, he was also did the morning announcements. So we became good friends. Jeff Shanker. I dated a couple girls who were on the ambulance squad back in the day. Cindy Hanna was class of 78. There's Patty Adams, who was probably class of 83, 84. Some good friends like Sue Walter and Carol Klein from different classes, but
Yeah.
a lot of with connection with either EMS or some type of emergency services connection. So
Is there anybody that you were friendly with you lost track of?
that's a good question. What's really interesting, there was a girl who I was really friendly with at Heritage Middle School. Her name was Katie Huber, and she was really nice to me. Wrote a really nice thing in my yearbook, but I've always wanted to track her down, and I haven't been able to. Apparently, she didn't go on the East, so I assume she moved away, changed her name. But that's pretty much it. There's guys who I knew, like I saw Gil Gluck, who passed away. He would go to the state conventions every year. There were vendors would they were basically education conventions for state employees. So I got to know Gil pretty well as a result of that. But that's the pretty much. It's funny because my wife, having grown up in upstate New York, when there's connections down in the Cherry Hill area, they like really cling fast to those connections. But having been born and raised here, it's not unusual to go into ShopRite or Walmart and see somebody from Cherry Hill East, because most of
Yeah.
the people, and I live literally a couple miles from where I grew up. I live on, like, I'd say I went over to the dark side. I live in the west end of town, where I grew up on the east end of town. So
So is there something that you wish classmates knew about you back then or now?
basically, I was just trying to, I was the, awkward kid, just, fat, trying to kind of fit in with the world and things like that. So, it's funny. I guess my mom was pretty sickly. So one of my blessings in life was because I was born October 5th, I got my driver's license, got my permit October 5th on my birthday. You would do that as a 17-year-old. And literally like 2 weeks later, I had my driver's license, which I needed because my mom was on bed rest. She had a lot of surgeries and things like that. I remember one time she was in surgery. I didn't know she would survive. And I remember uh, the guidance counselor sent a note to the math class and basically said, yeah, Lewis, your mother survived surgery. And I was like, I can't imagine in that day and age, like they would have pulled you down, you would have had some counseling, things like that. But it was just a different time. I think of everything, you talk about in the other podcast about like the gun, in the yearbook and things like that. What surprises me is I remember there's like a lot of Heineken posters and alcohol posters in the different class groups that met. I remember in the yearbook. So it was interesting that how in this day and age that would be unacceptable. In our day and age, people laughed. It was pretty funny. So I think humor's kind of changed a lot.
Well, it was also legal when we were 18 back then, and
Yeah.
now it's 21. But
Yeah.
so have you been back in the building since we graduated?
I had some nieces and nephews that graduated from East, so I've been back when they were there, but not recently. I heard it has not changed at all. So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that having lived in this community, it still looks, I know there's been some construction on the roof when I drive by it on Crescent Road, but for the most part, I haven't really been back. So
Yeah. So we're back in 1980, and we've just graduated, and you're looking out 40 years. Is this where you thought you'd see yourself?
I am a person who makes 5 and 10 year plans. I had this garbage assignment when I was in grad school that plan your life 5 years, 10 years in the future. And I pulled it out because I said, I want to get married. I want to have a family by the time I was 30. All those things that I've achieved. I wanted to retire. I actually thought I'd retire a lot sooner, but I enjoyed what I was doing in government and wanted to stay longer. But yeah, for the most part, it was funny because I really felt I got my call to government in fourth grade. It was like you would study New Jersey history. So I ended up, you would take a bus trip up, see the state museum, see the state house. And I remember looking back on the bus coming back, and I really kind of felt like in my spirit, it was like one of those like surreal spiritual moments where you felt that I was going to be back there someday. And I was really fascinated with government and politics. I still am. I follow politics the way most people follow sports. Read the Wall Street Journal every morning. Just really want to know what's happening in the world. So I'm kind of a news junkie still today, so.
Yeah. So if you could have designed your perfect job, what would it have been?
It's really fun. I kind of wish that my family had a business,
Mm.
because I think it's kind of nice to be able to go into a family business and kind of keep that tradition going. But I really like public service. I really thought I would have been a cop or an FBI agent.
Oh,
I went, but at the same time, I'm glad that I had the career that I had because when I got to the Department of Education, I was actually able to work a 7 to 3 day. So I would leave Trenton and get to all of my kids' sporting events by 3:45 when they're on the
oh,
field.
that's nice. That's nice.
So that's something I really was able to enjoy. I only missed one of my children's concerts, and that's because Matt had a concert at Carusi Middle School, and Jan went to that, and Liz had a concert at Cherry Hill West, and I went to that. But for everything else, I've been able, and it's really kind of funny being a parent. I'm, like when you're doing this podcast, I was set up a half hour before, ready to go because I've always been one of these people who over plan and over prepare. I would always sit in the front row thinking my kids loved it. It wasn't until later in life after they graduated, they hated it. It scared them to death. They felt uncomfortable when they were singing a solo or playing on their instrument. And I was like, I can't, like, why did you say something? I would have sat in the back. You know how tough it was to get there to be the first one through the door for all of their concerts, all their activities. And, mom and me thought we were doing a good thing, but we felt uncomfortable. And so I was like, they should have said something. Then I probably would have been less concerned about getting to things on time.
That's funny. So, what's your best piece of advice to your 18-year-old self, or maybe you gave it to your 18-year-old kids?
Well, one of the things I didn't take an advantage, and like I said, because my mom's health history and I was really active in church activities in another town, is that I really forced my kids when they hit middle school is they had to do 2 sports, they had to play an instrument, and they had to sing all through school. And they hated me for it. I remember when my daughter was doing lacrosse at Cherry Hill West in her freshman year, I'd be picking her up and she would be crying. I said, sweetie, you'll thank me later. And she was playing tennis and unfortunately tennis was no cut JV. She couldn't even keep the ball in the court. But eventually she got to varsity and eventually she played well. And eventually she was able to do a lot of those things when she got to Penn. So and I remember like my son coming home from football practice, absolutely hated it. But it's like, I wish I would have done it because I just think those lifelong lessons, he ran cross country and as a parent of somebody who runs cross country is you see the start, you wait an hour and then you see the finish. And then
Yeah.
the rest of the time you're talking to parents. And then like he did wrestling and I wish I would have got my son involved in wrestling sooner because he really, but at the same time, because the parents, especially in that community of athletics, are really involved. And in fact, my mechanic, Glenn Moorfeld, his son was involved for years at the Sunoco on Kings Highway. And as a result, they're just great people. It's really, I think when you develop those different sets of communities, I think it really helped my kids get connected. Like my dad had a pool growing up because he built a pool with all the kids, couldn't afford a swim club. So like we joined the Kingston State Swim Club when my kids were, when my dad wasn't going to fill his pool anymore. And then he decided to fill his pool, but we still stayed in Kingston. And I thought it was a great opportunity for the kids to be part of a community that they didn't have and other things. But eventually that went bankrupt. So now it's part of some other type of, I think it's going to be like a dog park or something.
Mm. All right. So we've reached our fast and furious finish.
Okay.
So, did you have a favorite TV show or movie or book from back in our high school days?
Yeah, 240 Robert. It was about it was basically written by the writer of Chips, Mark Harmon, and actually Matthew Perry. It was his first on-screen credit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he played a kid, and 240 Robert was a, um, excuse me, an LA sheriff's department that they were also paramedics. They were emergency services. So I just love that concept. There was a writer's strike in 1980, so it was canceled in 81, so it didn't live that long as a show, but that was a great show.
All right. How about your favorite musical group or artist or genre?
I was really into and still am into Barry Manilow and
Eh,
Elton John. And I'm embarrassed because, everybody would be, going to, you
but
know,
everybody hums those songs. I mean, you
yeah,
just can't help
I
but.
can't smile without you, Kara. I just can't smile without you.
All right. Did you have a favorite place to hang out with friends, eat during high school?
Cowtail
Is it
Bar.
Cowtail Bar? I was gonna say, is it still
Yeah.
there? The answer to that one is
No,
no.
no, it's a CVS. And what's fun about Cowtail Bar is I don't know if the ice cream was really good, but you got these little pretzel sticks you could shove into your ice cream, and then you could go out and feed the animals later. Watch the cows and throw them food and things like that. Richmond's, which is where the Cherry Hill new library is.
Okay.
That was a place, and then obviously like Olga's was East Side, Woodcrest Diner, which isn't there anymore either.
No, that was gone early. Yeah.
Yeah, and then since I hung out with a lot of kids in Haddon Heights, there was a place called Penn Pizza Palace, which is on Mount Ephraim Avenue, and then Rexy's Bar was a place that we would go to because the Flyers would hang out there on the Black Horse Pike.
Oh, wow. All right. So, remember this guy?
Yes, I do. He had hair.
Yeah, here. So, did you like your picture? Did you like your quote? And your quote, if you can't read it, is, and this is Louis
Louis.
Schopfer live on WCHE, the voice of the Cougars.
Well, I figured that the tagline would be something people remember. And obviously, I ripped it off from Saturday Night Live. So Saturday Night Live was really popular back then. It was Monday morning. I was doing the announcements. People didn't listen to them anyway. But by coming in with a really low, and I also think of, Good Morning Vietnam, which came out afterwards. But, it was just trying to get kids' attention. They would pay attention. If anything, 10, 20 years after that, there would be somebody from East I would bump into it and would remember that tagline, would remember the voice. So that was pretty cool. The hair and stuff, yeah, it's great having hair. The suits, it's nice about when you retire is you don't have to wear pants anymore. I can walk around in shorts. I am wearing
Okay,
pants
I'm
today,
glad you
so
clarified that you're at least wearing shorts. Thank you.
yeah. But you don't have to worry about wearing suits and ties anymore. I was curious if that is ever the pandemic. I think took some of that stuff away. I'm curious how much of that is going to come back eventually.
Yeah. All right. So we've gotten additional information. By the time you go live, there will have been a lot more information about the yearbook. But just since that information isn't yet public, do you know anything about the Western theme?
I was thinking the Urban Cowboy was popular in 1980,
Was it? Okay.
and also that came out as a movie. So I was
Yeah,
curious
it
if that
is.
might have had an impact on that. I also think Blazing Saddles was, I know, you couldn't produce something like that today.
Oh
Was
no.
earlier was 73, but
Okay.
that kind of went along with our generation, as we were going through. So I'm curious how much of Western motif was part of it.
Was part of, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see as each of these go live. There'll be some additional information coming about, but that's an interesting interesting angle. All right, Lou. So, anything else you want to tell somebody from our class might be listening? Kind of parting shots, as they say.
No, well, I absolutely loved getting together with you guys, last week, and
That was
that's
a lot of
something
fun. That was a
that
lot
was
of fun.
something I would never have done when I was working because driving back and forth to Trenton, I had a lot of invites to get together, and when you're raising kids and you're trying to provide for your family, you don't spend the time on the stuff that's really important and getting together. And I would love to connect with alum from Cherry Hill East just to chat, just to hang out. I still live in the area, live on the west side of town, and being retired, I'm free during the day. So would love to get together. But thanks so much.
Oh, that's great. Well, Lou, thank you again for being on and sharing what you've been doing over these past years. And next time up in town, we'll hopefully all try to get together again. So thanks for being on, and enjoy retirement. Have
Thanks,
fun.
Karen. And thanks so much for doing this. This has really been a lot of fun, just learning about fellow alumni throughout the years. And I hope it continues. And I hope we get to hear from everybody.
Yeah, that would be great. Well,
Okay.
thanks,
Thanks so
Lou.
much, Kara. Take care.
Thanks for joining me on It's Been How Long? The podcast about Cherry Hill High School East students from the late 1970s and the early 80s. A shout out to my cousin Brad Corbett, whose podcast We Weren't Friends in High School inspired me to do this podcast and whose advice and encouragement have been so helpful. Thanks also to my husband, Randy Coughdale, who read all the fine print on the podcast hosting website so I wouldn't have to. And thanks to Jeff Lyons, content consultant and guinea pig, and to Deborah Smead, also content consultant. And thank you to all our classmates who are listening in. See you next week.